Find a double camera here somehow so you can see the devotees in the temple, as well as Shushigorni Tai, and all the devotees online. It's a new world. Can you see everybody in the temple? See the devotees. Everybody say hello. Hare Krishna. And I'm going to go on here, and I'd like to, I'll introduce myself. My name is Krishna Dulaldas, and I will be one of your hosts for this evening. And can everybody online hear us okay?
Yes, Prabhu.
Okay, excellent. Wonderful. Thank you. So I'd like to welcome our devotees online. We have Harinam Amrita Prabhu, welcome. We have Jay Prabhu, Hari Bol and family, welcome. We have JY, welcome. Kirtiraj Prabhu, welcome. Mother Leela Mohini, Hare Krishna. We have Mother Nirantara, Hari Bol, your parents are here. Mother Paula, welcome. Rupa, welcome. Russell Music Academy, that's me. And Mother Sadhana, Sharat and Sonia, welcome. Matthew Prabhu. And those are our guests that are here online. And then we have all the devotees in the temple. So what we just finished doing right now is we had some kirtan, and we were welcoming our Lordship Shri Shri Gaura Nitai here at 212 Somerset Street East in Ottawa. And just before that, we had a MSF, Monthly Sankirtan Festival, which most of you here at the temple were there also. It was so nice to see you. And this festival was aimed at actually sharing the Lord's holy name with others and sharing prasadam and offered foods that we have also with others, with guests, and making some friendships. And so some books were being distributed. I believe I have some numbers here. I have it. Do I have it here? Thank you. So total book scores were, so we had 26 books that went out at 131.65 Lakshmi points. Wonderful. And it was just such a nice experience to see people at the park. There's some nice kirtan. We had a tent. We had some prasadam. Devotees got up really early in the morning to make some takeout plates for anybody that was there and to give to other guests that were coming by. So overall, it was a really wonderful event. And let's give another Hari Bol to all of the organizers of the event, all of the devotees who put so much effort in prepping prasadam and bringing it all there, and all of you for coming also. Let's give a round of applause. So now we just finished kirtan, and we're going to move on to the second portion of our program. We have a guest speaker with us today. And
Hare Krishna. Krishna Dwal Prabhu, your sound is kind of low. Could you speak louder?
Louder? Okay.
Or into the mic?
Is it better right now?
A bit, yes.
Okay. So we'll have a guest speaker and giving us a nice presentation. It'll be about 45 minutes or so. And then we'll have about 15 minutes for questions, comments, right? Realizations. So I hope that devotees online and in the temple can listen up and please share your feedback afterwards. And then following that, we are going to have some more kirtan for a few more minutes, and we will conclude our program for this evening. So I'm going to pass over the microphone to Mother Yeshika, my co-host. She will introduce our guest for this evening.
Hare Krishna, dear devotees. Once again, welcome to Sunday Feast program. Today, our guest speaker will be His Grace Sri Sesa Prabhuji. Prabhu joined ISKCON in 1973, inspired by the political activism of In God We Trust Party for Purified Leaders, which was organized by members of ISKCON. He was initiated by Srila Prabhupada in 1974 while he was traveling as a member of the initial Bhaktivedanta Book Trust Library Party. He attended the United States Military Academy and later in 1991 earned a Juris Doctor degree from the UCLA School of Law. He served as a temple president of both Washington as well as Philadelphia, as the managing editor of Back to Godhead, magazine and as the North American trustee of the Bhakti Vedant Book Trust. And this capacity earned him membership on the GBC, which began in 1994. Prabhu also has a portfolio of two ministries, Minister of Education as well as Justice. And currently, Prabhu and his wife live in Alachua. So once again, we'd like to welcome His Grace Shesh Prabhuji and hand it over to him. Hare Bol.
Thank you so much, dear devotees. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes.
Good. I think those are the three most important words on the internet society we've become today. Can you hear me? Actually, that's a good question for the devotees to ask all the people like you're describing out at the book table and the Sankirtan, monthly Sankirtan festival. It's a good question to ask. Can you hear me? Because you have an important message for all of the modern man. Good news for modern man is the message that we carry with us everywhere we go. And so I thank you for giving me the opportunity to be with you again. I think I spoke to the group at the temple last year on either Janmashtami or Radhastami. I know it was a holiday that I spoke, but anyway, I'm happy to be back with all of you again. And so we can share our realizations about Krishna consciousness. So tonight, I'm going to be speaking on the subject of happiness, and we'll be reading from Bhagavad Gita. So what I'd like to do at this stage is chant some introductory Mangalacharana prayers, asking for blessings that our collective endeavor here this evening will bear fruit, and the fruit of Krishna consciousness growing in our hearts. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Agyanatimarandasya Gyananjana Splakaya Chakshuram Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobhistam Sapidam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Guru Vaishnavam Cha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Param Sahagana Valita Shri Vishakam Vitam Cha He Krishna Karuna Sendo Dina Bandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostite Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrisabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hare Priye Panchakalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasti Gaur Bhaktivinoda. Now all together, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. So dear devotees, we'll begin our discussion this evening with the text from the second chapter of Bhagavad Gita, text number 2.32. It's a rather interesting verse in that there are not many lectures on this subject matter, but this verse is a key into the main subject matter that we'll be speaking about, which is happiness. And it's one of the ways in which Krishna presents to Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita this idea of happiness and being happy. Yat vichaya kupapanam swargadvaram upapatam sukhinam kshatriya partha labhante yudhava advisham. Translation: O Partha, happy are the Kshatriyas to whom such fighting opportunities come unsought, opening for them the doors to the heavenly planets. Report by Srila Prabhupada. A supreme teacher of the world, Lord Krishna, condemns the attitude of Arjuna, who said, I do not find any good in this fighting. It will cause perpetual habituation in hell. Such statements by Arjuna were due to ignorance only. He wanted to become nonviolent in the discharge of his specific duty. For a Kshatriya to be on the battlefield and to become nonviolent is the philosophy of fools. In the Parasara Samhiti, or religious codes made by Parasara, the great sage and father of Vyasadeva, it is said, the Kshatriya's duty is to protect the citizens from all kinds of difficulties, and for that reason, he has to apply violence in suitable cases for law and order. Therefore, he has to conquer the soldiers of inimical kings, and thus, with religious principles, he should rule over the world. Considering all aspects, Arjuna had no reason to refrain from fighting. If he should conquer his enemies, he would enjoy the kingdom. If he should die in a battle, he would be elevated to the heavenly planets, whose doors were wide open for him. Fighting would be for his benefit in either case. So, subject matter is happiness, or should we say happiness or the lack thereof? Because happiness appears to be quite elusive. I think it can be safely said that everyone wants to be happy. We find even in animals and creatures that they also want to be happy. They also want to avoid the tribulations of fear and death. So this idea of happiness is something that is promoted by everyone. Scientists promote that technology will bring us a happier future. Educationalists give us the instruction that by gaining knowledge, you'll become happy. Philosophers throughout time have dwelt on this subject matter of happiness, what it is, how to find it. And our political leaders, they promise us happiness with their various policies and programs. But despite all of this focus on promising happiness, happiness still remains the most overpromised and under-delivered commodity that the world experiences. And so everyone wants to be happy, but we must be doing something wrong because no one can find out even what it is concretely, but to speak achieving it. And even those that do achieve it, I don't want to say that everybody since time immemorial is a failure and that we're the only ones that right. No, there are people that get it right, have an idea how to create happiness amongst a smaller or larger group of people, and they may achieve that. But the fact is that this world is so cruel, so saturated with things that make us unhappy, that whatever little achievement we might have made towards being happy disappears very quickly. There's a saying of one sociologist here in the States, maybe you're familiar with it, but he describes that most people live lives of quiet desperation. Now, again, I don't want to make this sound like a gloom and doom thing, because we do want to talk about happiness, but we should understand the reality of life in this material world. Practically every religionist also promises some type of eternal happiness. So happiness seems to be at odds with this material world and our existence here. So the question is, and I think it's probably the question, is that is there anything that we can actually do to change this picture that I just tried to paint for you? Is there any way in which we can change our destiny? We can help others get over their struggles with material nature. Or is it just meant that we're supposed to suffer senselessly? There's some people that believe that. Particularly a group of French writers earlier in the 1900s, the existentialists, they concluded, they looked at life and the sufferings and unhappiness that was everywhere, and they tried to search out a cause, a reason through their intellect for this. But ultimately, they also just concluded that it's absurd. Life is absurd. It's filled with suffering and unhappiness, and there's no solution. Fortunately, we have, by the mercy of the Lord Sri Krishna, and particularly Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, come up with some responses to the suffering and unhappiness that is this material world. And I'd like to suggest this evening that each and every one of you sitting in the audience or listening on the Zoom conference has achieved something that big philosophers for centuries have been trying to understand, and in part at least, even for the beginning student at least, conquered over some of these difficulties that lead to the psychologists or sociologists saying that most people live lives of quiet desperation. Actually, we find, and the reason why I chose this verse to speak on from Bhagavad Gita, is that it reveals Arjuna's existential crisis. He's been instructed, he's been faced with having to engage in a war that would pit him against his relatives, his dear loved ones. And he saw no meaning in it. Even if he won the war, he saw no meaning in it. And so he was confused. He was confused about what to do for his duty. And why Krishna would be advising something that seemed so contradictory to happiness. And so Krishna, in his interaction with Arjuna, as described in Bhagavad Gita, explains to him different conceptions of happiness and gives the ultimate conclusion of how one can find permanent, not just happiness that stays away, keeps away the miseries, like an umbrella that keeps the rain off of your head. Not like that, but he gives a final solution about how one can get out of this material world. And perhaps more importantly than that, how one can help others get out of this material world, get out of the sadness. And I think that's an important point that I'd like you all to keep in your minds as we go through these different kinds of happiness, that for the Vaishnava, it's not just happiness for himself. It's the Vaishnava works tirelessly for the benefit of others. That's why Srila Prabhupada came at such an advanced age to this country, to the Western countries, to give things not just for himself, but for all the conditioned souls that he would meet in the course of his journey. And so Arjuna was confused. How did Krishna instruct him in such ways? By talking about happiness. That's the subject matter. Well, this verse describes Arjuna and his duty. In the Vedic conception, one of the first things you'll come across when it comes to trying to understand how to be well situated in this world, it's this idea of duty. So Krishna explains to the Arjuna that why is he lamenting? Because if he does his duty, then he'll be happy whatever the outcome. Now, this is very interesting because I don't know if any of you have ever been in the theaters of war, but voluntarily going into a theater of war, either as a soldier or being caught as a civilian in the exchange, the crossfire, it's not a very inviting or happy place to be. One famous American general said, "War is hell." So Krishna is trying to convince Arjuna why he should fight and be happy doing so. And he's encouraging him to go into a theater of war, places simply full of misery and suffering and unhappiness. Why? How does that make any sense? Well, it makes sense in terms of the first principle of happiness that Krishna is explaining to Arjuna, and that is duty. By following one's duty, particularly the Varnashram system, which Srila Prabhupada has instructed us, is the basis of civilized human society. By following the principles of duty outlined for one in that Varnashram system, one can find happiness in this world and in the next. So this is Krishna's first argument to Arjuna, that if you do your duty, you don't have to worry about success or failure. Even you don't have to worry about your physical demise, because if you follow your duty, then you get a good result. You will get a good result. We can even say you'll get a happy result. What was that happiness? That's described in the verse. You'll get the happiness of going to the heavenly kingdoms. If he loses, if the worst happens, he lost his life, no worry. You'll go to the heavenly kingdoms where you can enjoy in ways in which we'll just for now classify as sense gratification. Enjoyment beyond your conception in these middle planetary systems awaits for you in the heavenly planet systems if you do your duty. That's the point. So duty is the first way to that Krishna tries to explain to Arjuna how he'll be happy, how he can be happy and get out of his confusion. Okay, that's the system of karma, fruitive activities, doing something and then hoping for return. But the problem is with that, and why Krishna goes on, and we need to go on to understand more, is that karma is also very fickle. Yes, it's exacting this or that, but there's so many combinations and permutations of activities of karma that are taken this way and that way, that you can never be sure exactly what's going to be the result. And often the result is disappointing or not worth it or unsatisfying in some way. Karma has this problem that sort of ruins the idea of happiness. You can find yourselves in situations that are inexplicable, where you thought you'd be happy, but then the result is something else. So fruitive activity or doing your duty only provides a limited perspective on happiness. And therefore, if we're to truly understand that Krishna's teachings in Bhagavad Gita take us beyond this and to a better type of happiness, then our search must go on through Bhagavad Gita for next type of idea of happiness that is presented by Krishna. Now, there are many, and I can't claim that I'm covering them all here, but I'm just focusing on 4: karma or fruitive activities, duty, as we talked about. And the next is the environment. Structuring our environment in such a way that's conducive to happiness. Now, all of you, I'm sure, will know that that means cultivating the mode of goodness. And so in the 14th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, Krishna explains to Arjuna what is the result in terms of happiness for one who cultivates the mode of goodness. He says, O sinless one, the mode of goodness, being purer than the others, is illuminating, and it is free from all sinful reactions. Thus situated in that mode, those situated in that mode become conditioned by a sense of happiness and knowledge. So the mode of goodness involves practically every aspect of our life. How we eat, how we sleep, the activities we engage in, cultivation of knowledge. All these things help shape our environment. And actually you see this idea of how the mode of goodness is conducive to this idea, this sense, this feeling of happiness and well-being by being situated out of the passion and hustle and bustle of the urban area, or being in a more rural, pastoral type situation. You can feel the change in atmosphere. And it's so great that a sense of happiness pervades one's being. So that's another presentation about how one can attain happiness by creating your environment in such a way. Actually, we see in today's world, there's much due concern for the environment, how we're interacting with the environment, how we're ruining the environment. And we certainly support efforts to not poison ourselves or those lives of our children in the future through destroying the environment. But it's, again, a limited conception which gives us only partial relief from the unhappiness of this world. The science of the modes of nature is described in Bhagavad Gita, that they're always competing against each other. Ignorance competing to be superior to passion and goodness, sometimes passion's on top, ignorance and goodness. The three modes are constantly in competition like that. That's why it's described, this material world is Bhava Sagar, an ocean of misery. Waves going this way and that way, representing the modes of nature. And so at best, it gives us only, the mode of cultivating the mode of goodness only gives us a sense of contentment and happiness. But the next moment, it's going to change into something different. Now, the next type of happiness, which is described in Bhagavad Gita, is more conducive to what we as transcendentalists would want to become absorbed in. And for that, there's a verse in the 18th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. Brahmabhuta prasanatma nasochiti nakanchiti samasaveshu bhuteshu madbhaktim labhyate param. One who is thus transcendentally situated at once realizes the supreme Brahman and becomes fully joyful. He never laments nor desires to have anything. He is equally disposed toward every living entity. In that state, he attains pure devotional service unto me. So Krishna is giving what is moving towards the conclusion in describing this Brahmabhuta stage, a Brahmabhuta stage where there's no longer the hankering and lamentation, wanting and being frustrated that characterizes life in the modes of nature. We can actually become free from that. That's what transcendental means, actually, to be free from the constant struggle of the modes of material nature. There's a level of existence that goes beyond all that, where happiness is a state of being. And so this is a very important step toward Krishna's final conclusions of Bhagavad Gita, that Arjuna should take up the fighting and do his will, do Krishna's will at the Battle of Cultivates. But there's one last snare of the illusory energy which keeps us from being eternally happy. That's part of this transcendence. And that is the impersonal conception of liberation from this material world. Yes, we can get rid of all the problems that cause suffering and unhappiness. And there is a state beyond all of that. But unless we go to the personal understanding of Krishna as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, our eternal master, friend, child, lover, unless we get to that understanding of transcendence, then the Shastras describe that there's every opportunity, every chance that because one is not acting to one's full potential as an eternal person, that one will fall down from even that transcendental level and have to come back into this material world again. Prabhupada said, oh, when this happens, we may come back and do charitable work like opening hospitals or other things to relieve the sufferings of mankind, to bring some happiness into the world. But it's not the pinnacle for which we are really striving, which is to never come back. To go to that place from which one never comes back. That is the goal. And that is the highest level of happiness that can be achieved. Fortunately, by the mercy, grace of Srila Prabhupada, we have the opportunity by engaging in the activities he gave us to come to that ultimate stage where we're truly free from suffering and misery and we're eternally happy. Now, I know it's interesting if you look at the lives of those who have achieved that. What do the lives of those that have achieved that look like? Because if we're not looking through the right lens in our glasses to see, then we'll misunderstand their lives, or at least their lives will be bewildering to us when we try to understand how is it that they are free from the unhappiness of this world. Well, the first thing you'll see is just like some of you today, Mr. Dulal was explaining how he went out to the monthly Sankirtan festival. Monthly Sankirtan festival means some anxiety, some trouble, taken from trouble. It may even be difficult for certain people to approach others in public and give them Krishna consciousness. But by taking that sacrifice, by enduring those difficulties to help others, one actually experiences a higher taste. One actually can get some idea that if I just continue along this path, not so much concern for myself, but concern for others, then I will taste the highest bliss. I'll taste the highest happiness. That's Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's instruction, not just what I'm saying. But if we approach conditioned souls and try to give them Krishna consciousness, no matter how much difficulty that causes us, then Krishna becomes very, very pleased. And he blesses us with a happiness, with a taste. We talk about this idea of taste quite a bit. What does it mean? What's trying to be conveyed? Actually, happiness is what's trying to be conveyed. That illusory topic of happiness is available when we look at these great souls and we see that they are self-sacrificing. This gets into some of the interesting things about happiness, what it is and how it's attainable. Because one would think that happiness means for me, that I've achieved something, and I'm going to hold on to it with all my might. Prabhupada calls such persons, actually not Prabhupada, Rupa Goswami calls such persons Kripana. They're like misers. Misers have a great deal of wealth, more than they could ever use for themselves. And so they hoard it. They hoard those resources, that wealth, and don't share it with others, thinking that that will make them happy. Thinking that that will make them happy. But the great souls, they don't think that way at all. The great souls, those who are truly beyond the influence of this material world, who are Vaikuntha men, as Prabhupada called his spiritual master. He was a Vaikuntha man, Prabhupada says that Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. They come and they're willing to take all sorts of misery just to make others happy. Just to make others happy. And why do they do that? Because they're acting on the basis of the real senses. You see, happiness, as conceived by most people in this world, means sense gratification. It means bringing the objects of the senses in contact with the senses. It means seeing something beautiful to satisfy the eyes, feeling something very soft and smooth to satisfy the sense of touch, tasting very palatable foodstuffs. Actually, when I first came to Krishna consciousness, this idea of sense gratification and bringing the senses in contact with the sense object was such a revelation to me to see what it means. What are people actually doing when they're trying to be happy? They're just trying to gratify their senses. That's the level of happiness. Now, if you stay on that level of happiness, then you're bound to be dissatisfied at some point in time. Because why? Because our senses are limited. Just like all these conceptions of happiness I've been trying to explain to you tonight, they're limited. They have their limitations, their faults. So gratification of the senses and consequent search for happiness based on satisfying the senses is limited by its scope. If you like ice cream, you can eat a bowl of ice cream. You can eat maybe another bowl, and maybe another one after that. But pretty soon you're going to get to the point where you push the bowl away and say, not anymore, not one more. Why? You think the senses aren't gratified? They'll take it unceasingly, that kind of gratification. But there's a limitation of what can be achieved and enjoyed when sense gratification is the goal. And so the secret that Krishna is trying to tell Arjuna is that unless you satisfy your transcendental senses, there's no question you'll ever be happy. These material senses we have are false. They're simply coverings of what Prabhupada in one purport calls our super senses. I didn't recall reading that, but I read it recently. He says super senses. You all want to be Superman or super this or whatever or not. We should be super controller of the senses. That's Goswami, actually. They're Superman. But yeah, he says super senses. So unless we try to satisfy our super senses, which are on that transcendental level that we were talking about a little while ago, unless we do that, then, well, there's no question of doing that. But happiness can be found. It is real. It is deep as the ocean. It's ever increasing. This is what we say, Anandam Buddhi Vardhanam. When we talk about Sri Krishna Sankirtana, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said, it's Anandam Buddhi. It's always increasing more and more and more. That's the nature of gratifying our spiritual senses. But the characteristic of one who's at that level is not, you won't find them acting in such a way that it looks like they're gratifying their own senses. They're completely engaged in satisfying others. They're completely engaged in satisfying others. Satisfying Krishna and satisfying Krishna's devotees and satisfying all the conditioned souls. No consideration for themselves. That's the first characteristic of one who's truly happy. Now, there's another characteristic, and I'll keep it short just so we have time for some questions. But there's another characteristic of one who's truly happy, or I should say, how one can become truly happy. And that's found in the 8th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, where there's the history of Vamandev and Bali Maharaj. Bali Maharaj was an asura. In other words, he was one who takes pleasure in gratifying the external senses, not the internal senses. Asuras, ungodly people, they have no knowledge, or even if they have knowledge, they have no respect for or no practice of transcendental principles. And so that was Bali Maharaj's situation. He fought against the demigods and took away the heavenly kingdom, that place that Arjuna was trying to be enticed to go by following his duty, the heavenly kingdom. Bali Maharaj took it over himself. And so to get it back for the demigods, the incarnation of Lord Vamandev appeared as a dwarf Brahmana. And he had a strong message he was bringing with him, a message which is revolutionary. Particularly as we go through, you'll see it's revolutionary compared to our modern society today, where we're ruining everything by excess. We're destroying the planet, destroying the future by excess. His message was very strong. So as part of his plan to take back the heavenly kingdom from the asuras and give it to the suras, to the godly persons, Vamandev appeared, and he approached Bali Maharaj at the time that Bali Maharaj was performing a sacrifice. Generally speaking, the asuras, they perform sacrifice. We kind of associate it with some God-centered activity, fire sacrifice, different activities. But the purpose is different. Ours is to glorify the Supreme Lord. Bali Maharaj was to gain more material strength, strengthen his position, his hold, his illusory hold on trying to find happiness, enjoy happiness. He knew it was illusory. And so therefore he performed sacrifices to try somehow or another desperately to hold on to it. So Vamandev came in the assembly where Bali Maharaj was performing a sacrifice. And I'm skipping over some things. It's one of my favorite pastimes. Noting the time here, I want to share a key point about the appearance of Vamandev with you. So Vamandev appeared as a dwarf Brahmin, and he asked Bali Maharaj, because you see these kings, even if they are asuras, if Brahmins or other saintly persons came to them, they would sometimes do or act in such a way to try to get their favor. So Vamandev, knowing this tendency of Bali Maharaj, of course, there's a whole other story. Bali Maharaj was the grandson of Prahlad Maharaj. So he was a devotee at heart, even though he was acting as a demon. We won't go into all that. We'll just try to get the key instruction about happiness that Vamandev gave to Bali Maharaj. So Vamandev approached him at the time of he was performing this sacrifice, and he asked him for charity. And he asked significantly for only 3 paces of land. Bali Maharaj broke out laughing. You don't know who I am. I'm the king of heaven. I've taken over heaven. I can give you anything you want. Planets, villages, cows, wives, whatever you want, I can supply to you without limit. But Vamandev held fast on a principle that's extremely important when we're talking about happiness. And I'm going to read the verse in the 8th canto Srimad Bhagavatam, which explains this. Because he stuck with his request, despite being tested or tempted with unlimited opulence, unlimited ability to have anything he wanted. He stuck with his request for 3 pieces of land. And here's why, and it's the key, it's the secret to all happiness in this world. He said to Bali Maharaj, one should be satisfied with whatever he achieves by his previous destiny, for discontent can never bring happiness. A person who is not self-controlled will not be happy even with possessing the 3 worlds. Contentment and satisfaction. Again, these things don't look to a materialist like someone who's happy, being satisfied, because they're tormented with being, their search for happiness. We're having more and more and more is what you want. The Sultan of Brunei, he's got a garage that has something like 600 cars in there. And like 25 of them are Rolls Royces or something like that. I mean, for what? For what? Just so you can say that you have them? You can't even use them. And is he satisfied? No, a new Rolls Royce is coming every year, something new. Not new, I'm dissatisfying, unsatisfying. And so Vamandev is giving the clue to happiness here, and we shouldn't miss it. That being content and satisfied with whatever you achieve by your previous destiny is the key to happiness. Prabhupada says something very interesting here in the purport that I just want to highlight. He says, if happiness is the ultimate goal of life, one must be satisfied with the position in which he is placed by providence. And Prabhupada quotes Prahlad Maharaj. But he says here, Prabhupada in this purport says, without this superior knowledge of sense gratification, that's what we're talking about here, superior knowledge of sense gratification, super sense gratification, super senses. Without this knowledge, one may try to satisfy his material desire senses, but happiness will never be possible. And then what's important for us particularly is Prabhupada says, the purpose of the Krishna consciousness movement is to spread this understanding. There you have it. There's our charge for this life and future lives, is to try to convince people that happiness is all right. It's okay to want to be happy. We're not saying that you shouldn't be happy. No, it's okay to want to be happy. But you have to know how to be happy. Otherwise, you continue to suffer. That's why we're taking so much trouble on our part to help you, because otherwise you're not going to be happy and you simply be frustrated. And the cycle will go birth after birth after birth in this material world. Break the cycle by cultivating satisfaction, contentment. Give up this longing that's kama, that's disease, that is the disease of our heart. This is the purpose of the Christian consciousness movement. And this is why it's important for us to know all these different types of so-called happiness, or let's say limited happiness that's available. And what is the most happiness that is possible that we can achieve, and how to achieve it. We have to save as many of the conditioned souls as possible, because that pleases Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, that pleases Lord Shri Krishna. And as a result, we get transcendental happiness and satisfaction. So much so that, look at Prabhupada, he suffered 2 heart attacks. They told him when he was getting on the ship, Srimati Maharaji told him, Swamiji, you're just going to go to that place, it's cold, and you're going to die. He was told, but he didn't care for that. That wasn't his motivating factor. Pleasing others, breaking the cycle of unhappiness for others is what motivated him. If we can gain some similar motivation in our lives, then our interactions will be perfect. And guess what? We will be happy. So I think we're getting toward the end of our time, but if there are any questions or comments at this stage, I'm happy to take them.
Thank you so much, Sesa Prabhu. That was very nice. It was very inspiring. And so at this point, devotees, we ask that perhaps you present your questions or comments. We'd like to hear from you. Online, there is a feature which is called Reactions. And it's just at the bottom, and you could hit the raise hand button and raise your hand, and we can take the questions or comments in order. And in the temple, we have these features here attached to our limbs here, so we can, that's our hand, we can raise the hand, and and then we would like to hear from you there. So do you have any questions and comments? I just have one. While we wait, I wanted to say, okay, can you hear me, Sesa Prabhu, okay?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, wonderful. It was just more of a realization. You were speaking about, the austerity at first, and how duty, I guess, or having a sense of duty, how that's important. It's almost instrumental when it comes to happiness. And I was just reflecting because the other day, I was talking with one of my sons, and he thinks happiness for him, like real happiness, it's like playing video games, right? And I get it. I was there, right? And I went through it, and he played for a couple of hours. He's doing it, and then it was time to finish playing video games. It's enough. You have to go outside, do something else. And he was so distressed, after that. It was like you could see, like his mind was racing. It's like, oh no, it's finished right now, and it was like the whole day was going to be ruined. And then at some point I said, okay, you're coming with me. We're going to the garden, right? So we went to the farm, and he says, we're picking weeds with Grandpa right now. And he's like, really, he was pushing against it. He didn't want to do it. And then he got into it, and you could see his mood completely started changing. He was like happy, he was satisfied, he had some conversation that was happening with Grandpa, and he was assisting, he was being helpful, a little bit of duty, discipline. And so similarly, even when we go out on let's say this MSF monthly Sankirtana, even part of me was thinking, as I was at home, I'm like, oh, should I go? I've got Sunday feast later on, maybe I'll come a little bit later. But due to the association of devotees, right, it's always so encouraging that when you do come out, you do a little bit of duty, a little bit of austerity, you go do a little bit of book distribution, some service, a little service, and then you really truly do feel that, I find you do feel the satisfaction, and that's there. And I think this element of having that association, or have somebody be able to pull you out, right, to be able to give you that experience, this is really what transcends. Just like you speaking today, Prabhu, just hearing from you, it was like, it was such a relief, right, to be able to hear that, oh yes, that's right. It's so simple. All I have to do is just do a little bit of devotional service, and that's it. But even for some of us who've been, let's say, practicing or trying to practice, we forget that, and we need to constantly, I feel, almost just hear that, or be reminded, or be in the association of those devotees that are constantly engaged.
That's the purpose of devotees, senior devotees, such as Niranjana Swami. I know he comes up there sometime, maybe not for the last year and a half or so because of COVID, but he comes and they travel, they give us their association. association and regulation are so important in our lives. We can never go without those two things. We always need association and regulation. Even for your son, regulate. If you lead a regulated life, then you'll have time for doing good things or whatever you need to do. And in that way, your life will be some kind of control. Otherwise, out of control is not satisfying to anybody.
Yes, thank you so much. Oh, we have a question here. Hold on a second.
Okay.
I got a question.
Okay, I'm gonna say this one. Go ahead, yeah.
Okay. I had a question before and I just threw my hand up. And they said, they didn't ask me what my question was. I wasn't sure what the meaning of my question was. But the question I have was, what's the difference between what is impersonalism and personalism? What is impersonalism as compared to personalism? Or what is the difference, or what do they have in common, or?
Okay. So, Prabhu, we have one of our guests is asking, what is the difference between personalism and impersonalism? Do they have something in common? And just a general question.
Okay, thank you for your question. Personalism and impersonalism are different states, let's say, of transcendence. We spoke about the three modes of nature, how they control everything in this world, and they condition us. They're like our masters. They tax us. They have us do this and that. We get all kinds of reactions according to karma. When we get to the level of transcendence, all of that is finished, and we are in a undisturbed state of consciousness, which manifests either in terms of everything being all one with no differentiation, an undifferentiated absolute truth, versus the understanding which we consider to be higher than that impersonal, sort of all the same unchanging type of existence. Rather than that, we accept a absolute truth that reflects the personality of God, controller, that is full of variety and personal interaction with his devotees and with all living beings. And so there's a big difference between an impersonal understanding in terms of what one will do and with a personal understanding. In a personal understanding, one engages in devotional service, bhakti, yoga, serving the Supreme Lord, fulfilling his senses. He's a person, therefore he has senses. That we have senses because he has senses. But his senses are so perfect that if we satisfy him, all of creation, all of existence becomes satisfied. And so therefore we find that he dwells in a spiritual world that's full of variegatedness and variety and different loving exchanges that he has with his devotees. That's all in the personal conception of the absolute truth, as opposed to the impersonal conception in which it's just all one with no variety, no personhood, just something that's hard. Bhagavad Gita describes it. It's hard for the spirit soul to take that understanding as ultimate, because we have experience of our real selves as spiritual beings, as spiritual persons who engage in loving exchanges with the Lord. And so it's hard to maintain that impersonal understanding. Therefore, it's also subject to this kind of, well, it's not really subject to limitation, temporal limitation, because it's a special spiritual state, but it's subordinate to the personal understanding of the Supreme Lord. Does that help you?
Does that answer the question for me?
Well, I have a lot of ideas. the one I remember most was transcendence and spiritual and devotees. That's what I remember from the start. It was answered. Yes. Like, I was glad he was able to say something that, that made sense. And it changed. I had a thought before what impersonalism was. Impersonalism, I thought was, well, he knows Krishna. Impersonalism, well, he doesn't know Krishna, but he believes in God.
It probably would help if you had a small book, Perfection of Yoga. Maybe
Oh yeah, I said yoga.
you could read that.
Yep. Prabhu suggested you have a nice book actually, which
I
clarifies.
know I got enough books.
Yes, perfection of yoga, but it speaks to that question. Hare Krishna. All right. Do we have any other questions from devotees, maybe online or here, some realizations, thoughts? Oh, we have a hand from Raja.
Hare Krishna. Thank you very much for the talk. And I was reflecting on the point that when we go out on Sankirtan, when we give Krishna to others, that's when we really become happy. And I was thinking about today, I wanted to go out, and when I got there, I was feeling this, of course, a little bit of uncomfortableness or shyness, and I'm trying something, but I'm not with my I guess this full conviction that I want to give Krishna. And I am so much more comfortable just talking to somebody or smiling, and I know that this is part of the process of giving a good impression. But I just wondered, is there something that what can we do to get out of this comfort a little bit more? Because I think that I don't know if that's almost becoming this little bit of miserliness, or this something where we're keeping it, just to smile or talk to somebody, but not directly give Krishna. And I think that I don't know if I fall into this, that I'm too passive. And I don't know if that's a clear question, or how to not be so passive.
Well, I think that what's always helpful for devotees is Krishna Dulal mentioned it before about association. When we go and meet the public to give Krishna consciousness, go with somebody else, pair up. I know that His Grace Vaishya Prabhu, my godbrother, I know he visits Toronto quite often, and he does what he does there and other temples that he visits. He has the monthly Sankirtan party, and it's truly a party. He was here in Gainesville, and there were a number of devotees feeling like you do. And so what he did is got them all together, like around 10 or 15, and they were going door to door. And so 10 or 15 people would be standing outside the door, and he would knock on the door. And when the person opened the door, he would explain that we're all here today trying to share something that it's for your benefit. And so everyone felt comfortable because he made them feel comfortable. So the main thing is to try to give Krishna. And if we do that with groups, that's better. We don't have to be the lone soldier, the lone hero. Work with others so that you feel comfortable and you give them comfort. And in that way, both of you can be giving Krishna to people that might, they may also feel just as shy as you do. So that's one thing we have to remember also, that people we meet, they're also maybe coming across it for the first time, maybe a little hesitant. But if everyone has a good feeling, understanding the good thing that we're doing, and willing to participate in a group, then you'll be successful, no doubt.
Did you get that, Raja? I kind of muted you, so if you have anything to say, you'd have to unmute yourself.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay. So I think you've answered all the questions, Prabhu. I think everybody's happy, it seems to me. Right? I know I'm happy, right? So thank you so much, really, and thank you. It was for short notice. I approached Prabhu, midway throughout this week, and I spoke with Mother Lakshmimoni, and she said Sesa Prabhu's always happy to speak.
Yes.
There's an opportunity to do some service. So thank you so much, Prabhu. We're very, very fortunate, and we hope that we can, that you would be willing to maybe speak more often, here in Ottawa.
Anytime you call me, I'm happy to serve the devotees. Thank you for the opportunity. And thank all the devotees for your kind listening.
Hare Krishna. Srila
Hare
Prabhupada.
Krishna. Prabhupada ki jai.
Thank you. So now we're going to continue. We will have a few more minutes, maybe 5-10 minutes. We'll have the kirtan, darshan with Shushugo Nitai, and then we'll conclude for this evening.